text. Okay. So the Haftorah is about the coming together of Yehuda and the other tribes. We know that there was a split in the Jewish people because originally, the first king was, of course, King Saul. That didn't work out so well. And King David took over. And after that, King Solomon took over. He managed to hold it together for the duration of his reign, which was 40 years. But after that, the 10 tribes other than Yehuda decided to separate from him. And they appointed upon themselves a king by the name of Yeravam ben Nevat. He started, of course, out as a good man. He's a Torah scholar. He was appointed king by none other than Achia Ashiloni, who was a prophet. So he was a divinely ordained king. Of course, he wasn't from the line of David HaMelech, so his line of kingship was not destined to last forever, but it could have lasted for as long as he would have remained true to the Torah. Unfortunately, he did not. Power got to him, and he wanted to separate the Jews from the Beis HaMikdash. And Rehavam's rule, who was the son of King Solomon, so he made houses of idol worship, forbade the Jews to go to the Beis HaMikdash, and he even made idols of gold. And using magnets, they would move and they would talk. And he got the Jewish people really stuck into idol worship. And the prophet informed him that he and his entire line, his entire family, would be wiped out. And so what happened after, I think it was 3 generations, or maybe 4, there was a coup, and they were wiped out. So there were other kings from other tribes. Almost all of them were bad. Very few of them were good. Even the ones that were good ended up bad. And of course, we know that the 10 tribes were exiled before Yehuda and Binyamin were. And that's because of their behavior, their idolatrous behavior, and other sinful types of behavior, which brought down Hashem's wrath on them, and they were exiled by the Assyrians. And of course, to this day, we don't know where they are. It's possible that we'll be reunited with them in the future, but it's not exactly clear. So here's the Haftorah. Hashem spoke to me saying, this was Ezekiel the prophet, Son of man, take one stick and write upon it for Yehuda and for the children of Israel, his companion. And take another stick and write for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel, his companions. So basically 2 sticks, one representing the tribes of Yehuda, which is basically Yehuda and Binyamin, and one is the tribes of Yosef, which is the other 10 tribes. Bring them close one to another into one stick, and they shall be one in your hand. The prophets, of course, from time to time would do symbolic gestures to indicate that their prophecy was going to be fulfilled in a very physical way. And when the children of your people say to you, will you not tell us what these are? So this was apparently supposed to be done in some kind of public venue. And people would ask, what are you doing? Say to them, so says Hashem your God, I'm going to take the stick of Yosef and the tribes that are his companions, and I'm going to place them with the stick of Yehuda and make them into one. And then miraculously, those two sticks are going to physically merge into one. And Hashem says to the people, behold, I'm going to take the Jewish people from amongst the nations. I'm going to gather them, bring them back to their land. I'm going to make them into one nation on the mountains of Israel. There's going to be one king for all of them. There will no longer be two nations or two kingdoms. And importantly, they will no longer defile themselves with their idols. I will save them from all their habitations where they have sinned. I will purify them. They will be from your nation. I will be for them a God. Okay, here's the key verse. Va'avdi David melech aleihem. My servant David will be the king upon them. Ve'roya echad yeh lechulam. They will have one shepherd for all of them. They will go in my mitzvahs, and they will guard my chukim v'asu oisam. They will keep them. So the Jewish people are going to merge back into one nation. But who is going to be the king over that nation? It's going to be David. Of course, it can't literally be David. David has passed away many millennia ago. It means the descendant of David, whom we call Mashiach. He is going to be the one and only king upon them. He is going to be their shepherd, so to speak. They will dwell on the land that I have given to my servant to Yaakov, them, their children, their grandchildren, forever. The David Avdi Nasi Lahem La'olam, and David, my servant, will be the leader for them forever. And the Haftorah goes on with some more blessings. So, the Lubavitcher Rebbe speaks about these two verses. One says, Va'avdi David melech aleim. My servant David will be the king over them. Another pasuk says, V'David Avdi, and David my servant, Nasi lahem la'olam, will be their Nasi, their prince, forever. In the first verse, it's Avdi David, my servant David. In the second verse, it's with David Avdi, David my servant. In the first verse, he's called a king over them. In the second verse, he's called Nasi Lahem, the leader for them, not over them, but the prince for them. In the first verse, it doesn't say La'olam, it doesn't say forever. In the second verse, it says La'olam, forever. It's hard for me to ask these questions without showing you these verses, which is why I will put them into the chat. I'm going to take a picture of them, print my screen, and I will put them into the chat. Okay, Zoom, chat. Can I put a picture in? Yes, I can. Okay, so there you have a picture of the two verses that I'm talking about. One starts with Avdi David Melech Aleihim, and the second one starts with David Avdi Nasi Lahem La'olam. David, my servant, will be the king, the prince for them forever. Okay, so in order to understand this, the Lubavitcher Rebbe refers to a Gemara in Sanhedrin that talks about different descriptions of Mashiach. Sanhedrin 98b. I'm going to put that into the chat as well, so you can follow along, since I didn't get a chance to do this before. This is the Gemara that discusses names of Mashiach. Here it is. Rabbi Yehuda says, a lot of calls. I didn't get any calls all day. And all of a sudden, I start giving a shear on those calls. Okay. Here we are. I'm putting it into the chat. All right, here goes. Aviuda says that Rab says, the Holy One, blessed be He, is destined to establish another David for the Jewish people as the Messiah. As it is stated, and they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will establish for them. So he calls it Mordechai. I think maybe your yarmulke fell off. Is it possible? You're the only one with their screen on, so I can actually see you. Dr. J, how you doing?
Good, good.
Excellent. Very good.
Happy New Year.
Now I know what you look like, now that I saw you at Rabbi Smith's party the other month.
Yeah.
I'm here
How's your
too.
Hanukkah?
I'm Andrea, his wife.
Oh, hello, Andrea. Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you. Thank you. Always a pleasure to hear your class.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining. So, they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will establish for them. And that means it is not stated I established, but I will establish, indicating the name of the future king will be David. Okay, so Mashiach's name is going to be David. Papa said to Abaya, but isn't it written, and my servant David shall be their prince forever, indicating that King David himself will rule over the Jewish people. Because my servant David sounds like somebody we know about from before already. It sounds like David HaMelech is going to be the leader in the future. Of course, he's buried. Susan, no problem. That's okay. We won't hold it against you. Whenever you have the camera, that's fine. But until then, it's also fine. But anyway, the point is that apparently David is going to come back with the resurrection, and he is going to be the king. And that's one of the verses that we just read. Avdi David. Is that the first of those two, or is that the second? My servant David, yeah. Avdi David, the first one. Avdi David Melech Aleichem. Oh, forever. No, that's the second verse, sorry. David Avdi Nasi Lahem La'olam. So it's my servant David, the one from before. He's going to get up in the resurrection, and he's going to be the king. So which one is it? Is it Mashiach who's going to be called David? Or is it David himself? Abaya said they will rule in tandem like an emperor and a viceroy. The Messiah will be the king, and David will be second in command. So many kings have a second in command. It's not quite like the president and the vice president. because the vice president really has no power. He's just, somebody to hang in there and wait until the president dies or becomes incapacitated. Of course, he has some other functions, something in the House or in the Senate, and whatever. But there are other governments where the second in command actually has some power. Take, for example, in England, you have the Queen, or now you have a king, and you have the Prime Minister. Each of them has power. You have in Israel, you have the president, and you have the prime minister. Each of them has power. And in various other places, you might have such ideas that there's a main king, and then there's a secondary king who also rules and executes and is involved in ruling the country. Of course, we have somebody like that in this week's parsha, and in the past several parshias, where we have Yosef, who becomes the Mishnah Lemelech. He becomes the second to the king in terms of Paro being the king in Egypt. So apparently, according to the Gemara, that is what it's going to be like with Mashiach and David. Mashiach is going to be the main king. David is going to be the secondary king. The Aramaic for this, by the way, in the Talmud is Kegoin Kesar Upalgi Kesar, like Caesar and half Caesar. Caesar is the king. Half Caesar is in the Roman government. They had some person who was like the second in command. He was called the half Caesar. So that's how the Talmud reconciles the question. So far, so good? The Rebbe asks a question. Thank you. The Rebbe asks a question. We don't find in the Torah's system of governance, we don't find any position known as Palgi Keser, as a half king, as a Mishnah Lamelech, as a second to the king. We don't have that in the system of governance that is set up by the Torah. That's not to say that the Torah is against that system. We just don't have it. We have the concept of a king that's discussed in the Chumash. We have the concept of checks and balances with the king, by the way. Those of you who learn the Daf Yomi, the daily page of Talmud, will know that we just learned if a king wants to start a war, he has to consult with the Sanhedrin. He has to consult with the highest court of the land, as well as with Hashem. How do you consult with Hashem? No problem. You go to the Kohen Gadol, and he has an Urim V'Tumim, a breastplate, and you discuss it with him. With Hashem, basically. So there's a system of checks and balances. You can't just go to war. Maybe the king has a vested interest and it's not really good for the people. So that's why there's a system of checks and balances. But we don't have a concept of a Mishnah Lamelech, a second in command. Of course, we said Yosef was that. So that's okay, but that's not the Jewish system. That was the system that existed in Egypt that the Torah tells us about. We don't find it recorded in our history, at least in the Torah history of the Jewish kings, that they had a Mishnah Lamelech, a second in command. What we do have, by the way, on a few occasions in Tanakh, is where the father abdicated in favor of his son while he was still alive. Specifically, we have that by Uzziah. V'hatzaras zorcha b'mitzchoy. Uzziah became a leper when he tried to enter the Holy of Holies and become the Kohen, even though he was not a Kohen, of course. He got zaras and he was banished from the city. Even the king, if he was a leper, he was banished from the city. He lived for many other years, I think maybe even 2 more decades, but he wasn't ruling because he could not rule when he was banished from the city. And his son, I think his son's name was Asa, already took the reins of leadership during that time. So we do have something like that, but it's not really that. It's really the king is gone. I mean, he's alive, but he's not acting as the king. And the new king is already the new king. So why would Mashiach inaugurate a new kind of position in the Jewish governance system that we didn't have until now? Of course, it's an interesting idea. The whole idea of having David HaMelech be a secondary king is an interesting thing. Because when you were the real king, and all of a sudden you're the secondary king, probably not so easy. And of course, if Hashem wants him to do that, I'll do that. But it's interesting. Another interesting point that the Rebbe points out is that as far as our literature is concerned, it seems from the simple reading of the text that the resurrection does not happen at the beginning of the Messianic era. The Messianic era starts off perhaps even with fully natural occurrences. There arises a great king. He's a great Torah scholar. He's able to influence people. And sometimes he actually has to fight, but he fights and he wins. And he eventually conquers all the Jewish people's enemies, convinces all of the remaining people to serve God, to recognize Hashem as the master of the universe, to recognize the Jewish people as the chosen people, to assist us in every way and everything. And of course, they help us build the Beis Hamikdash. They help us with everything, like all the prophecies go. Everything is wonderful. The concept of the resurrection doesn't really play a part in that. Of course, we believe in the resurrection. It's one of the 13 principles of faith. Various sources for it in the Chumash and the Tanakh. But it doesn't seem to be something that occurs in the beginning of the Messianic era. It seems more like something that occurs much later on. If that's the case, how is it that David is going to be the second to the king when he's not alive? So you could say, well, maybe the Talmud is following the opinion that is brought in the Zohar, that the righteous will get up first. Even though, generally, like I said, it's understood that the resurrection takes place later, maybe 40 years later after Mashiach comes. But according to the Zohar, the righteous will get up first. So David is righteous and he'll get up first. But again, that's not so clear because the Talmud doesn't say that. So therefore, that is another question on this teaching. That David himself will be the Mishneh Lamelech, the second to the king, when we don't exactly know when he's going to have his resurrection. Okay, so listen carefully to the Vort. Here's the Rebbe's explanation. Am I talking a lot or is it my imagination? I feel like I'm talking a lot. Any questions, comments, Hanukkah stories you want to share? Favorite latke recipes? Favorite type of donut? Go ahead, Mordechai. What do you say?
Yeah, well, even though, well, like according to Torah law, that there's not like a deputy for the king. It reminds me that in the Rambam that he talks that they're but below the Kohen gods. All in other words, even before you reach like the head of the Mishmaros, there are various levels under him, like a deputy, and then a certain number of assistants report to the deputy, and
Yes,
well, so they're like about 4 levels or whatever before.
absolutely. I'm on board with you on that one. Absolutely. The Kohen Gadol did have a deputy Kohen Gadol. He was called the Sgan Kohen Gadol. And he appears in various texts and he has various duties. And we even know his name in the case of one of them, because in Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKoyanim, Rabbi Chanina, who was the second to the Kohen Gadol, is quoted. So we do have that position in terms of a Kohen Gadol. But the reason for that is simple, because a Kohen Gadol could become ritually impure at any given moment, and somebody has to fill in for him. So you have to have somebody who's really ready to go. When it comes to a king, it's not necessarily, if he dies or he's killed, we'll figure it out then. The government can function more or less without him for a little while. We'll choose the son that's best suited, the oldest, or whatever it might be, and then we'll move on. It's not like the Kohen Gadol that is needed, and we need to fill the place right away. Okay, my friends, here is the fort. The Rebbe explains that when we say that David is that Mashiach is going to be like another David, and then we say that David himself is going to be like the half-king, we are actually not talking about David himself in either case. We are always referring to Mashiach. And what we're saying is that Mashiach will have two functions. In one of his functions, he will be different than David. He'll still have the name David because he's a descendant of David HaMelech, but he'll be different. He'll have different qualities. And in one respect, he will be like David HaMelech. He will be like a continuation of David HaMelech. And in that respect, he will be like a half-king. Again, we're talking about David, Mashiach himself, not David HaMelech at all. And Mashiach will have two functions. Like you can have sometimes in, in different countries where they have a parliament system, where the prime minister can also be the secretary of defense. He can also be the foreign minister. He can also be whatever it is. He can wear two hats at the same time. David HaMelech is going to have those two hats. He's going to be his own kind of leader, new kind of leader. And in that respect, he's going to be Caesar. He's going to be like an emperor, the complete emperor. And then in another respect, he's going to be a continuation of King David, nothing really new. And in that respect, he's going to be like a half Caesar, like a Mishnah Lamelech, like a second to the king. And we're going to see soon how this fits into the verses of whether he's a Melech Alehem, a king over them, or whether he's a Nasi Lahem, a prince for them. And whether it says clearly it's La'olam, forever, or not. Susan asks, in ancient times, who could decide the acts of war against enemies? The answer is the king would ask the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was the highest court of the land, so they would hear the pros and cons of that idea of going to war. They would also consult with the Kohen Gadol, who, like I said, would have the breastplate that would give Hashem's answer, because there were different letters on it, and would light up and spell out what Hashem answered the question. So that's how it worked. Joint decision, exactly. Checks and balances. Okay, my friends, here's the idea. And this is also going to answer why we call Mashiach Caesar in this Talmud, which means Caesar. And the second position is half Caesar, instead of using a Jewish expression of Melech, king, and Mishal Melech, secondary king. So the word Caesar in Greek means to cut. and it's based on the concept of a Caesarean section. Julius Caesar was named that name because he was born with a Caesarean section. They had to cut open his mother in order for him to get out. In those days, parenthetically, Caesarean sections were not performed on live women because they didn't know how to do it in such a way that they could stitch them back together. They only did it if the mother died in childbirth or otherwise just died, but she was already due. She had a viable child inside of her. They would do what is now called a Caesarean section. They would cut her open and save the baby. It wasn't until much later that they came up with the method of doing that operation and the mother surviving. So he got that name because he was born with the Caesarean section. And then all the subsequent Caesars, took that name because he was such a powerful Caesar, so they decided to take that name. Similar to Paro in Egypt, that was the name of all the Egyptian kings. Similar, by the way, to Avimelech, which is the name of the Philistine kings. Similar also to, maybe you would say Kaiser Wilhelm, the Kaisers, or the Tsars in Russia. These were the titles. So Caesar was the title, and it was based on Julius Caesar. So now, in Hebrew, when something's an exception to the rule, what's the Hebrew word for that? Sorry, who knows? Who knows Hebrew?
Not a nace. Okay, nace.
Nace is a miracle, but not every exception to a rule is a miracle. It's an expression in the Hebrew language. Sorry, the expression is yotzei dofen.
That's it.
Yotzei dofen. You ever heard of that expression?
Yes.
Yotzei dofen means somebody who comes out the side, like a baby who's born from the side. That's an expression for a person who's different, somebody who's exceptional, who's different, who's unusual. So Caesar was born with the Caesarean section, and that title, Caesar, denotes somebody who's unusual, who's acting in a way that is not expected, like perhaps like no one before him. And this is a description of Mashiach. What Mashiach is going to accomplish is something that nobody previously accomplished. Now, of course, many say that there is going to be many miracles in the time of Mashiach. Many say that the fruit tree, that the non-fruit trees are going to bear fruit, that the wild animals are going to become tame, and of course, the trees are going to grow cakes, they're going to grow garments, they're going to talk. God forbid a person who decides, I don't know why they would, but if they decide they want to pick a fig on Shabbos, the fig tree will call out to them and say, hey, it's Shabbos, what are you doing? So there's a lot of miraculous stuff that's expected to happen. The third Beis HaMikdash is supposed to come down from heaven, fiery Beis HaMikdash. Well, no wars is actually not a miracle per se, right? There were no wars, for a few years till the Ukraine war started, but that could happen without a miracle. Any other miracles anybody wants to throw in here to the miracle soup?
Well, the
There's a Gemara that
6-day
says a
war,
woman is gonna have a baby every day. One baby per day. That's pretty miraculous. Anybody else?
I guess my wife just mentioned healing for all disease.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Healing for all disease. That is correct. Apparently, there's going to be a splitting of the river, just like the sea was split for the Jews to go back from Egypt to Israel, towards Israel. So there's going to be a splitting of the river Euphrates. I don't know exactly who's on the other side of that river nowadays that needs to cross it, but there's going to be a splitting of that river also.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I also heard that the sun is going to, it's going to become like a red dwarf or something, and there'll be, I don't know, I'm trying to remember what I heard, that we won't be eating meat, we'll be eating only vegetables, or it might be the vice versa, I don't know, but I heard that the sun will nova, that there's going to be something that's going to happen to the sun that's going to be very significant.
Well, it does describe the sun in the verse as getting very, very strong. 7 times as strong, like the light of the first 7 days of creation. I don't know about red dwarfs and things. I'm not familiar if that's what the verse is talking about. But yes, there is a verse about that. Need a lot of sunscreen in these days.
Yeah.
Yes. It's been suggested actually that maybe there'll be space travel in these days. Because if the sun does explode, how are we going to survive? Rabbi Arya Kaplan suggested that we're going to have space travel. So we're going to colonize other worlds. And that's how we'll continue the species. Anyway, this is all conjecture. But the point is, we're talking about some major miracles. Nevertheless, despite all of this miracle talk, the Rambam is of the opinion that the entire Messianic era can take place without any miracles. Mashiach will be a king, very wise king. He'll convince the people to serve God. He'll convince the enemies of the Jews not to be enemies. If he has to fight with them, he'll fight with them. And he'll build a Beis HaMikdash. Don't need a miracle for that. And he'll bring all the exiled Jews back. And he'll teach them Torah. And we'll do all the mitzvahs like we're supposed to do with the third Beis HaMikdash, all the sacrifices. Oh yeah, just to go back to that about not eating meat. I'm not so sure about not eating meat. I don't think it says that. It says that we did not eat meat in the time of Gan Eden. That it says. But does it say that when Mashiach comes, we're going to go back to not eating meat? I don't think it says that. I think that's on the vegan people's wish list. I don't think it's true. Sorry.
I wasn't sure. I might have confused the two. That's what I was saying. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There'll be an abundance of plants. Plant life will be much larger, like it was, maybe during some of these eras in the, prehistoric
Yes.
eras, like Paleozoic era, Mesozoic era, and these others where plant life was much larger. It'll be something like that in order,
Yes.
So that might mean that there'll be more abundance of plant life that will make animals more, bigger, and we'll probably have, or we'll have more abundance of meat. So I may have confused the two, but I'm trying to, refresh my record.
No, well, that I agree with. There will be a great abundance of plants, like it's described in the earlier generations of the Beis HaMikdash, when the Jewish people were doing the right thing. It says in the Gemara how the grains would grow so large that they were the size of a kidney. A single wheat grain was the size of a kidney. And you could basically put one grape into a wagon and it would fill the wagon. And you could just pierce a hole in the side and put a faucet into it, a spigot, and the wine would pour out. So that was also pretty miraculous. But anyway, according to the Rambam, all these miracles are not necessarily going to happen. Maybe it'll happen if we deserve it, like major. But it's not necessarily going to happen. That's something that Mashiach, that we'll only know when Mashiach does come, as to whether it's going to be the Rambam's way or the other way. But in any case, things will be good. But the kind of world that will exist then with Mashiach is going to be an exceptional kind of world. Whether or not there will be miracles, whether or not the lion will physically be lying down with the Gars, the even Keves, the wolf with the lamb, and the leopard with the deer, and whether or not the lion will be eating straw like an ox, whether or not that happens literally or not, the world will definitely be a very unusual place, because those verses, according to the Rambam, to be understood as a parable, that the nations of the world that formerly wanted to tear us apart like wild beasts will become meek and will accept us and will make peace with us and so on. So it will be a very different world than what we see today. And that's why we call Mashiach a Caesar. He's like a Caesar. Because the Caesar, like we said, represents something unusual, something out of the ordinary, like the Caesarean section. Yotzei Doifen, an exception. Mashiach will accomplish exceptional things, even without miracles. With miracles, of course, it goes without saying. But even without miracles, to turn the world into a peaceful utopia where everybody serves Hashem and believes in him and helps the Jewish people, that's so highly unusual that that accomplishment is like that of a Caesar, of a Caesar, somebody completely on a different level, on a much higher level. And that is the meaning of the first verse that we saw, where it says, V'avdi David, melech alehem. My servant David will be the king over them. The king is referring to the way Mashiach will be a king. A king is over his subjects. He's above them. He's beyond them. Right? You don't mess around with the king. You don't joke around with him. You're not his buddy. You're not his friend. You take his word very, very seriously. He's a king over you. He's above you. But it doesn't say lo'olam. It doesn't say forever. The next verse, like we pointed out, says, "V'David Avdi, David my servant, Nasi lohem lo'olam, will be the Nasi forever." Again, calling him a Nasi and not a Melech. And here it says forever. So the idea is one of the functions of Mashiach is going to be a Torah teacher of the Jewish people. That is what the title Nasi indicates. Nasi also refers to the head of the Sanhedrin. So a Nasi is like a Torah teacher. David is going to be a Torah teacher, and that's why it says Lohem, to them, as opposed to Alehem, over them. A Torah teacher cannot be too far over and above and beyond his students. Because if he's over his students, he's not going to relate to them. They're not going to relate to him. He's just going to be giving a lecture to the air. To be an effective teacher, you have to be lahem. You have to be with your student. You have to be connected to them. It says in the Gemara that before Rava would start giving a shir, he would make a joke because he wanted his students to feel close to him, to feel some affinity with him. Not that they like he's a scary guy that they're afraid of and can't relate to. So that's why it says Nasi Lahem. He is a Nasi, he's a Torah teacher, Lahem, for them, with them to a certain degree. And the reason that Mashiach is called a Nasi, a Torah teacher, is because that's what it says. Mashiach is going to be a Torah teacher. He's going to teach Torah even to Moshe Rabbeinu, who received the Torah himself from Hashem. and even to the forefathers, Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov, you would think know everything. Mashiach is still going to be able to teach them. And that's because the pasuk says, Torah chadasha me'iti tetzeh. Hashem is going to reveal a new Torah. Now we know that the entire Torah was given at Sinai, and there can be no replacement of the Torah. The Torah remains forever. No prophet can come and say, sorry, the Torah is expired. It has an expiration date, and that date has arrived. And now there's going to be a new Torah. There was one so-called prophet who said that. His bris was apparently yesterday, the anniversary of his bris. And the anniversary of his birth was a few days before that last week. And we know him to be a false prophet. Because any prophet who says that Hashem took back the Torah is not a true prophet. The Torah does not change. Susan is asking if children are closer to Hashem before the age of 6. Why 6 and not 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1? Just asking why you're asking about 6, Susan. I don't know. Put it this way, children who are young have no sin. The Talmud says that the breath of young children is a hevel she'ein bo chet. It's the breath that has no sin. I don't know about closer to God, because I don't know what that means exactly. Like physically, obviously, we're all the same in terms of closest to God. God is everywhere. Spiritually, I don't know. I don't know. They don't really understand, concepts of godliness. But in terms of them not having sins, you could say that, because a sin acts as a blockage, and it does not allow godliness, so to speak, to reach a person. So not having sins can be helpful in so to speak, being closer to godliness. Let's use that as a euphemism. Okay, back to Mashiach. As a Torah teacher, Mashiach is not going to reveal anything new. Everything we have in the Torah was given at Sinai. Every teaching of Hasidus, every teaching of Musar, every teaching of Halacha, you name it, if it's true, authentic Torah, was already given at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. When the Baal Shem Tov came up with all his new concepts, they weren't new. He was expounding them from the Torah that already existed. He was focusing on certain parts of it, bringing out their hidden, deeper meanings, but never anything new. So here's what Mashiach is going to do. Mashiach is going to take that to the next level. He's going to also be teaching new teachings in quotation marks, because no one ever figured them out, because they're so deep. But nevertheless, they are sourced in the Torah itself. If you look deeply into the Torah, you will find those messianic insights. So this is what we mean when we say he's going to be the Nasi. He's going to be the Nasi is literally the head of the Sanhedrin, like the teacher. He's going to be the teacher. And he's only called a Palge Caesar in that context, the half Caesar, not the full Caesar. Meaning to say the Torah that he teaches is not actually new, which would make him like a full Caesar, like something totally exceptional, revealing something never before revealed. No, he's not going to be that. He's only going to be the Palge Caesar. He's going to be the half king, because what he's revealing was already revealed, but it was so deep that nobody could really get to it and explain it. So he is doing that. So he is considered, after all, an innovator, but only a half innovator, because most of it, or all of it, was already deep in the Torah itself, and he just brought it out. This also answers the question. Yes, question?
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. Is the when Mashiach comes, are we going to follow the oral law and the written law together?
Absolutely. The oral law was given at Sinai. And
I
that never
understand.
comes, that's never
No,
repealed
of
either.
course, it's the rice. I understand. But are we going to move more towards the oral law and try to phase out the written law? Basically?
No, why?
Well,
The
I
written law
would
is-
think that if we're, well, it would appear to me that there would be a necessity to try to, bring back things before the Mishnah and the Gemara, that it would maybe be, if people reach a higher madriga, that would be the attempt to try to reach that point, I don't want to call it reversal, but, something that would, because we actually, the Mishnah and the Gemara were put into effect to deal with the world that we were dealing with in Mitzrayim. I mean, not Mitzrayim, but Chutz La'aretz, I mean, even now, to some degree, you see cases where we're trying to phase out Good Shabbos or Shabbat Shalom, and I'm just giving small examples, of how we seem to be trying to move towards more back to Eretz Yisrael, and the way things used to be, as opposed to what happened in Europe, and our transition, from that point.
Right. Let's put it this way. The oral Torah was originally supposed to remain oral. It was only written down because of the necessity that we might get it. But now that it's been written down, there's no going back on it. We're not going to make it oral again and turn it into something that you just know by heart. Even though you'll be welcome to learn it by heart, no problem. And maybe you'll even remember things forever if you'll be healed and if you consider forgetfulness and illness. So maybe you'll be healed from that, you'll remember forever, but I wouldn't say that it's going to be going back to being oral and not being written, because the cat's already out of the bag. It's already there. I don't think we have to put it back in. I've never heard that, at least.
But can I ask you, if things are the Rabbanan, instead of Doraisa, it would be in conflict, wouldn't it, with concepts which would be related to those things that would be Doraisa? I mean, especially.
Why is there a conflict between Doraisa and Rabbanan? Why do you see that as a conflict? We observe 8 days of Hanukkah. We light the menorah. We say Hallel. We read the Torah. We give Hanukkah gelt, eat donuts, chocolate coins, all those wonderful things. Why is that a conflict with any Torah mitzvah?
Well, I'm just assuming that it seems to me that things that are derabanan, again, are from Chutz La'aretz, things that are being put into effect to deal with the changes of the society that we're living in. That's why we put into effect, things from the Rebbeim, as opposed to what that they were on a higher madrega, obviously, up until the Mishnah and the Gemara, which was still, under the influence of the Raisa, more or less, instead of the Rabbanan, until much later, until we start seeing more things were being instituted by the Rebbeim.
Right. So the Rabbanans, of course, are not only in the diaspora, they could apply it to Israel too, but they were instituted by the Rebbeim based on the necessity and the fact that they recognized that people were being lax in a certain area and they needed to strengthen it more and so on. So the argument can be made, well, when Mashiach comes, you don't need any protections because we're just going to do the right thing automatically. But on the other hand, there is another rule, which is that whenever a Sanhedrin declares a decree, you cannot repeal it unless you are a bigger Sanhedrin, or there is in that era a bigger Sanhedrin in numbers and in wisdom. So it is possible that some of the Rabbanans will be repealed, but not because they're in conflict with the Doraisas, because they're generally not conflicting, but rather maybe they're not necessary because we don't have to have those protections. But that'll be a case-by-case basis. The new Sanhedrin will have to decide whether or not to uphold those Rabbanans or not. Okay, so once again, Mashiach is going to be the Palge Kesar. He's going to be also the Torah teacher. In this respect, he is not, sorry, he is the Nasi Lam La'olam. He's the Torah teacher forever, as opposed to the king where it doesn't say La'olam forever. The idea is when it comes to the kingship, you establish things up front. I'm the king. Anybody doesn't listen is toast. Maybe kill off a few people who didn't listen. Everybody gets into line. They know how to behave, and that's it. I'm not saying Mashiach will kill anybody, but I'm saying he has to establish himself as the king, convince, maybe Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, all those nations, whatever, convince them to be friends with us. Okay, that's all good. But once all of those treaties are signed, and once people are already back on track and behaving properly, then his kingship isn't so strongly felt because it's just a system that's working. You don't have to do anything about it. That's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say forever. Of course, he's the king forever, but do I have to think about it every day as my king? When it comes to the Torah teacher, yeah, he is your Torah teacher forever. Every day, he can teach you new insights, new understanding, deeper and deeper. There is no end to the depth that the Torah has. And therefore, it says, David Avdi, Nasi Lahem La'olam. David, my servant, is a prince, a Torah teacher for them forever. He is going to be teaching new insights, new to us, maybe not totally new, that's what's only a half Caesar, but new insights to us we've never heard before, never had anybody explain to us before. And therefore, he's going to be teaching us always. Every day we're going to go to have a shir and review the shir, prepare for the next year, more and more and more, always deeper and deeper, and always new insights. And that's why it says David is the Nasi, the prince, the teacher forever. Okay, my friends. I made it through the class. Only one coffee, Baruch Hashem. It's been a long Hanukkah, but we got through it with Hashem's help. I hope you had a good Hanukkah. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Have a good Shabbos.